Like I said, good evening. My name's Eric Wright. I'm the education specialist for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight for our movie night and discussion. Before we get started, I would just like to say thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support. And also funding for these programs is now being made possible by some great sponsorship that we have through Generac Power Systems. So thank you to them most definitely for their continued support and the foundation support in our programming here at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. And in particular, I would like to thank the executive director for the foundation, Miss Jen Carlson. They do a great job, and we really enjoy putting on these events, and it's because of them that we are allowed to. So we are here tonight. I'm also joined by Molly Snow, one of the education specialists at the museum as well. She's going to be helping out tonight. So Molly, I hope you got your PowerPoint ready with all the questions and your graphics. And speaking of questions, let's just get started and get talking about the movie. And I'll start off with just an easy softball. What did everybody think of this film?
It was long.
It was kind of long, yeah. I think the way it was set up, it at least to me, it didn't feel as long as it was. I know I've watched other movies that were maybe a little bit shorter that felt much longer. Yeah. So I think they did a good job that way. But yeah, coming in at 3 hours, you really had to set a block of time aside unless you could watch it in segments. Any other thoughts? Just overall general thoughts on the movie? Lisa, you look like you have something to say. Oh, you're muted though.
Actually, I just got connected, so I was getting my bearings.
Oh, no problem. So I liked the movie. I hadn't seen it before. So watching it to get ready for this movie night discussion was the first time I had seen it. I will start right off by saying I'm not a huge Steve McQueen fan. And he received Best Actor nomination for this role. I'm not really sure what they were looking at. I'm not on the board of the Academy, so obviously there's far more intelligent people deciding this thing than myself. But I just saw Steve McQueen doing a lot of yeah. It was like, man. I read some reviews of him that said it was his body language and his facial expressions and his eyes that really sold the role. Maybe I have to go back and watch it again and maybe just appreciate Steve McQueen a little more in this role, but I didn't see it. Yeah. But overall, I liked the film. I thought it was very entertaining. I liked the historical period it was set in.
Yeah.
You don't see too many movies that go all the way back and set themselves during this time period. And I was uniquely impressed with the set design and the costuming, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Of course, and I totally forgot to go over my introduction page here. We are talking about the Sand Pebbles from 1966, based on a 1962 novel of the same name by Richard McKenna. This film was directed by Robert Weiss.
What is it?
I'm sorry? Oh, I thought somebody had a question. Cinematography was done by Joseph McDonald. Art and set direction was done by Boris Levin. They began filming this movie in 1965 in November, and it was originally set to be shot in about 9 weeks. 7 months later, they finished up primary filming. They had to deal with a lot while they were filming on location in Taiwan and Hong Kong, to include earthquakes, fires, and a 3-day riot in Hong Kong. That was particularly troubling for the cast. I'll go into a little bit more about that as well. And then a lot of interior scenes were shot on the back lot of Fox Studios in California. And that was all done at the end of production. This movie was released December 20th of 1966. It had a budget of $12.1 million, and it raked in a total of box office receipts of $30 million. So it did double its budget value, which is what studios are always happy with. 8 Academy Award nominations, 8 Golden Globe nominations, and only 1 winner in both of those segments. And that was, if I'm not mistaken, I'd have to go back and look. Maybe Molly has the graphic. I think it was Richard Attenborough for Best Supporting Actor for Frenchie Burgoyne. Like I said, overall, I really enjoyed the movie. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of my favorite parts of it as we go along. But I just kind of want to get into some of the questions. And one of the first questions, I usually start with, questions about some of the plot lines or things like that. One of the things I was impressed with Steve McQueen was the preparation that he did for this role. And I was kind of curious if anybody else was particularly impressed with what they saw from him in regards to preparing for this movie.
Did he do his own stunt work, for instance, or?
Interesting point. I don't think he did his own stunt work, especially at this time. He was a pretty big star, and stars back then weren't like Tom Cruise nowadays. Especially with the studio insurance, they wanted to make sure that their actors and actresses were well taken care of, and they certainly didn't want anybody injured. But in doing some research for this film, I found out who one of the stuntmen was, a very young Jackie Chan. Yeah, this is one of his first films that he worked on from an American-based production company. He was just a minor stuntman at the time, but I read a couple interviews and he said he really learned a lot from making this film about the American perspective of filmmaking, and particularly how they deal with stunts. A lot more safety concerns, a lot more technical aspects of it because of the safety concerns. And so I was kind of surprised to see Jackie Chan come up in association with this film. But Steve McQueen most likely was not doing his own stunts.
We had the extras, and they said that he did do a lot of his stunts. I mean, not the really dangerous ones, but he did get into the movie, and he spent a lot of time with the stuntmen. So that's what they said in the supplements.
He's definitely an action guy.
He is.
And I'm not surprised to hear that. I know at one point, some of the ship scenes were filmed down in Texas because they had the USS Houston down there, and they used that for some of the close-up ship scenes where you don't see the whole San Pablo. And while they were down there, I know that one of his friends brought him his Indian motorcycle, and the director was not happy about that at all. He said as soon as he got the motorcycle, he took off and nobody saw him for an hour, and the director, Robert Weiss, was not pleased. So I'm sure that maybe he probably did do some stunts. I can't imagine him doing anything too terribly dangerous.
Right, that's...
Anybody else got any thoughts on his preparation for this role? Go ahead, Lisa.
Did he prepare for the engine room and stuff? And
that was I was hoping somebody would hit on that, and that was one of the things that impressed me, was his technical abilities while running that engine room. And that's one of the things that I look for in movies when it has to be some sort of technical prowess, I guess, from the actor. And watching him negotiate those levers and opening up steam valves, I was never a Navy engineman, but he really looked like he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
I'm sure that, any actor who's preparing for a role, they're going to want to know not only what they're doing, but why they're doing it as well. So I was kind of impressed with the preparation that he had to put in for that particular aspect of it. Going back kind of to the plot line a bit. Sorry, I'm going to get up to my questions here. What do you think about how this film approached certain issues, particularly when it comes to, definitely there was, some racist elements, which were prevalent at this time, and as well, just the whole concept of colonialism, which creates the conflict between the Navy and the, I guess, locals. But how do you think that the movie dealt with these and tried to remain respectful at the same time?
Well, I'm not sure they really did. It still seemed like, it just was so much from the US perspective or from the Western perspective that, it made me a little uncomfortable at times. That, we were over there in their, we were there and that was their home. And, it just, I never felt like the film gave me that idea, the captain would make those speeches, those grand speeches about, things and stuff. It just seemed like I said, a little bit too much from the Western perspective, and that the Chinese were always the villains and so forth, or either the villains or the lackeys, the coolies.
Yeah, and how did everybody feel about that whole coolie system? And I'm sure the film depicted it probably in a pretty realistic fashion, but anybody have any thoughts on how that system was used, particularly aboard the Sand Pebbles?
What struck me about the whole coolie system and the relationship between the Americans and the Chinese was the Chinese had no illusions about what was going on. And I thought one of the characters that kind of intrigued me was Lop Ai, who and particularly the scene where the boats are starting to come up and they're calling out to have Holman come out as the murderer. I think that was the scene. But anyway, Lop Ai standing there very passively, kind of saying, not doing anything in effect, as sort of his resistance to the American imperialism there.
Yeah, and there was a couple scenes prior to that where Lop Ai showed not only the position that he had, and maybe the power that he had over the ship, and at one point you can see how that was really effective, and then a little bit later he kind of tries to exert the same sort of authority, and it doesn't go over so well.
No.
And you could just see a little click in his head. And I think you're right, Chris. They didn't have any illusions. They knew what was going on. They put themselves in these positions underneath, the Americans or the Westerners in general. But in reality, they were just there, as a placeholder, pretty much. Once things got serious, they knew what side they were on.
Mm.
I don't know how the Navy operated with that kind of system in place. I understand why. I just don't understand how anything was maintained, any sort of order, or really anything aboard the ship. When you have, people who can do the job, but at the same time, they're going to undermine you when they feel it's appropriate.
Yeah, well, they were not part of the chain of command at all. The traditional chain of command. They were freelancers all over the place, and the Navy guys, of course, had to follow the chain of command. They had to answer their commanders, but the coolies didn't have to answer to anybody, basically.
Well, they did. Lop Ai was the main coolie head.
Yeah,
and if he said something goes, then something goes.
Yeah,
but you're right. There was no military structure there. Right.
Yeah.
I sort of had the sense that this kind of relationship existed and has existed in basically every war zone we've ever been in overseas. In Vietnam, all the Vietnamese people that were the South Vietnamese who were assisting American troops working those kinds of positions. When I was in the Army, I had the option of accepting or refusing orders to go to Korea. And I went to one of the career NCOs to ask about whether it was worth going to Korea. And one of the things he told me was, yeah, take it. If you don't want them, I'll take you down to personnel and I'll take those orders. And I asked him why. He said, because you get over there, you get the overseas pay. Korea was still a hostile fire area, even though, because there was never any peace treaty. So you have all this extra money and you live in the barracks or the Quonset huts or whatever you're in. And what you do is everybody in the barracks pools that overseas and combat pay, and you hire people off the economy to come in and do all the work you don't want to do. So I said, I'll take the orders. For various reasons, I never wound up in Korea. I wound up in Hawaii instead, but that,
Oh, tough assignment there, Chris.
yeah, it was really rough.
Lisa, go ahead.
I just always, the way that Frenchie described it is it just kind of happened. Like they started doing this and then more of them came on the ship. And it just seemed like the engine room is a place that could totally be sabotaged. And so the security of everything, and they had their, where they boarded in that room all together. And it said that was never inspected or anything. So it seemed security wise to be completely not appropriate for the ship.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's, in this day and age, we would look at it like that. I would absolutely look at it like that. And that's why I can't really put myself in the mindset of where they were back then. Like I said, I can understand why they had that system in place. I just can't understand how they kept it or how it even really worked, because it doesn't seem feasible to me. And, as the movie plays out, we see that it does and it doesn't work.
I think the reason they weren't so concerned was pretty much reflected in Holman's attitude that they weren't smart enough to figure out what was going on. So they wouldn't be smart enough to sabotage.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the whole racism, the imperialism, that's reflected throughout the movie.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that was put out in the very beginning, especially Lisa, like you were talking about when Frenchie's describing, the run of the ship to Jake when he first gets on. That sentiment comes across more than once, that they do the work, but they're not very. And then when Holman has to choose another number 2 because he lost Chen, everybody's telling him he's not going to be able to choose one because they're all, they don't have the common sense for it, to include the captain. Mako, I think that's how you pronounce his name, was the gentleman that was chosen to be his number 2. I can't find his name right now. Pohan, that's right, Pohan. And if you are Conan the Barbarian fans, you'll remember Mako. He is the magician that saves Conan. And so it was kind of cool to see him in a much earlier role. I kind of brought up just a second ago about Chen's death. God, you could just see that coming from a mile away. I couldn't even watch. Once he started to crawl down there, I just kind of turned my head. I'm like, I know it's going to happen. I don't want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
But I was curious because there was a lot of conflict going on leading up to that scene. And I just kind of wanted to get everybody's thoughts on this. Who do you think was responsible for his death? Was it Jake? Was it Captain Collins? Was it Chen's own fault for volunteering to go down there because of pride? Or was nobody to blame and it was just an accident?
Nobody and everybody.
Easy answer.
I think it was the captain because the problem had compounded over time because everything was kind of loose and people who didn't completely know what was going on was running it. So he's in charge of the ship. So I put it on him.
Well, and just kind of to go off of your point, Lisa, Coleman did approach the senior leaders. He told them that there's going to be a problem in this spot, and if we stay here and don't take off, I can fix it. But they decided to go anyway, and so they had to fix it while they were underway, and that's what made it more problematic, I think. So I guess you could put the blame on the captain for not listening to his senior mechanic, who gave him the advice of not to go. Anybody else have a thought on that?
I remember thinking at the time I was watching it that, I think Jake had a feeling there was something wrong, or that, that there was a potential for this is to happen. And I kept thinking, if really, if he had any sense, he might say, don't go, let's not go down there, or whatever. But I don't know. I wouldn't say he was responsible, but I remember thinking at the time, like you, I had the sense of, wow, this is not going to end well, and somebody needs to stop this, because I don't want to watch it. But and I kept thinking, well, Jake knows it's dangerous down there, and but he didn't go either. So he
was going to, though.
He was going to, though. Yeah,
he was all set and ready. And like I said, Chen wanted to his pride was about him. That was his engine room for all intents and purposes, and he was the one that was responsible for the annual maintenance or whatever that didn't get done that caused this problem.
But how many of our other films had the same situation where the higher up officer wants to do one thing, but the more knowledgeable foot soldier, as it were, wants to go in a different direction, but because, again, like the pride of the higher officer saying, well, I'm the one in charge, we're going to do it my way, damn the consequences, right?
Yeah, and particularly, back during this time, the Navy was just starting to become a professional organization. We're certainly 20-ish years out of the age of sails, the very end of that. But the Navy was pretty much not a professional organization 15 years before the setting of this movie. And so a lot of the officers still really had this attitude about them that, I've been through Annapolis, I've, attained this rank, I can't be wrong. It doesn't matter. I'm always right.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's that sense anymore. I think, I'm sure that there is some, but I think a lot of officers now would definitely take the recommendations of the people in charge of those certain components, listen to them and make an informed decision. God, I would hope so. My son's an officer. I've tried to teach him, ever since I got out of the military, to listen to your sergeants, listen to the people who are doing the technical stuff. And if they say, this needs to happen before this, then you alter your plans and you make sure that that happens that way. And from what I hear from him, a lot of officers are like that nowadays. They will take those recommendations. They will listen. But back then, it wasn't that common. I'm in charge of the boat. This is what I say. This is what we do.
In answer to your question, I would say that I don't think Holman was at all responsible, frankly. As others have noted, he was willing to go down. He was prepared to go down. In fact, he was fighting Chen to go down. And then basically he read the power dynamics in that room and decided to let Chen go, because otherwise I think he saw that down the road, if he didn't let Chen go, he'd have even more trouble monitoring what was going on in the engine room.
Yeah, and Holman had a serious problem with the coolie system.
Yeah.
He didn't agree with it being in place. They certainly didn't agree with him. And it only got worse as the movie progressed. And you're right, Chris. I think that, had he not recognized that power dynamic, like you said, and kind of just once again kicked Chen off to the side, it could have been a whole lot worse for him.
And we wouldn't have had a movie.
Well, that too. At least not parts of them. Speaking of parts of the movie, was there any, I found a few. Did you guys find any parts of the movie that really didn't need to be there?
I thought that fight scene went painfully long. And it was just so graphic that, you know, I was kind of squirming through most of it.
Yeah, I agree.
Pretty rocky.
You're talking, I'm sure you're talking about the fight scene where they had to basically, you know, get off the ship, fight all the other guys while they're trying to hack that bamboo cord in half so they can, you know, continue on.
Well, no, I'm thinking of in the bar when they,
With
And,
Pohan.
yeah,
And okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it went like 4 rounds, you know.
in real time, 3-minute rounds.
yeah, it probably could have been shortened up a bit, but I thought it was kind of important to show that building up of Pohan,
Yeah,
building up his confidence, and then finally, you know, putting the bully in his place. What is it, 20 minutes later, Pohan's dead though? So it was like, yeah, you kind of look back and it's like, okay, you probably could have shortened that up a bit. You're right. Anybody else find any scenes that think probably could have been edited out, made the movie a little shorter?
Not to be edited out, but the scene that you're talking about where they boarded the boats as they're trying to get through the boom.
Yeah.
Like at the end I could see, like, because he was chopping the rope and it was to break the rope. But at first I was like, why would you go from this bigger boat and you're up higher when you have the perspective where you could be shooting down on these people and everything, and then boarding and putting yourself in that close proximity of danger like that. And the only part that made any sense to me was that he was you know, chopping the ropes for the boom, but I think you could have burned them or something. It didn't make sense to me to board the boat.
Question.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that for sure. Certainly, there was a bit of Hollywood in there, but
Yeah.
why you would abandon a, you know, sandbagged fighting position with your Browning automatic rifle, and instead opt to go to a sword and hand-to-hand combat?
Mhm.
Yeah, you're right. Kind of a risky decision.
Yeah.
That bamboo rope. Oh, here it is. Actually weighed about was where did I have that? I just wrote it down too. Oh, 1,000-foot heavy bamboo rope, 25 tons it weighed.
wow.
And that was actually a tactic that I was reading about that was used during the time period. Not so much against the U.S. Navy, but against different factions in China at the time, especially when it came to control, control of the rivers. They would use those heavy bamboo ropes, and it was really a great, effective barricade. And so when they incorporated it into the movie, from a historical perspective, it's kind of cool to see that. And then, yeah, to have to chop through it, I don't know about that. I think maybe, I don't know if the ship was tough enough to just ram it.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, that scene was kind of lengthy as well. One scene that I thought could have been, you know, done without was at the very beginning, when Steve McQueen is on, not the San Pablo, but another boat that's taking him to his duty station.
Yeah.
And he has dinner with the missionaries and with Candice Bergen.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, he meets Candice Bergen there. That's slightly important. He does kind of espouse on his views toward everything that's going on. But once again, it's Steve McQueen saying like 3-word sentences. And that scene was almost 5 minutes long. I thought that I just didn't see a purpose of that scene at all.
Yeah, I think it was important too because it sort of set up Jameson, you know, as a character that how, you know, he was he was, well, you know, he was taking the side of the Chinese, really. And, you know, which made him a complicated character, whether you know, agree or not, and how much you agree with him. But yeah, but some of those other guys, I mean, they could have cut out practically all the other guys and established those three characters, Candice Bergen, Steve McQueen, and Jameson, much more quickly, probably.
Yeah, could have shortened the movie up a bit. Kind of on that note, so now I need to get to.
I think setting Jameson up at that dinner also creates the tragedy for him at the end.
Mm-hmm.
He's the victim of the people he thought he was were his friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, certainly you have to have those connections throughout a film. I'm just, maybe they stuck a little too close to the book, and I think they could have Hollywooded it up a little bit and maybe chopped it down. You know, you could have made those connections in a lot shorter spans of time.
Sure.
Yeah.
But you know, once again, I am not a Hollywood director. Those people know far more about movie making and audience experiences than I do. So, for good reason, that's what they're doing, and this is what I'm doing. Kind of talking about Jameson. One scene that I really liked was when the San Pablo was getting ready to go, and they had to go to the mission to get the missionaries and bring them out. And once they get there, the Chinese army has their flag raised, and they're basically pitted up against the American Navy. And they're about to come to shots. And Ensign Bordellis, the XO of the ship, backs down. How do you think him backing down, how did that affect the crew? But more importantly, how did it affect the Chinese who saw the American Navy backing down?
Well, it seemed it would have empowered the Chinese, you know, to see the humiliation of the U.S. You know, military like that. But obviously, Bordellis was in a real, you know, tough position because he had been told, you know, absolutely do not fire any shots unless it's like self-defense, and we're starting to get there, but I don't think. I mean, Bordellis didn't have the stomach to actually do it, probably, and you know, could have been argued whether it was justified or not if they had come to shots. So you know, I mean, he was. I felt sorry for him. He's in a tough position, and to answer your second question, I think it probably empowered the Chinese. They said, you know, they saw it was a show of weakness for the U.S. military had been trying so hard with all these shows of force off the ship and everything, and this was a sign of real weakness.
Lisa, did you want to say something?
I can always talk. I agree. I think that it was humiliating, and it just, you know, didn't save any face for them. But like, excuse me, I don't know.
I can't. Hi.
I didn't think that he had a choice. It was like I was kind of feeling his position, and I'm like, I was like, sling the guns and escort us out of here. That's my choice. I didn't see the other choice as a choice.
You could see his response, how he felt about it when he got back on the ship.
Yeah,
he was literally in tears.
Yeah, and the rest of the guys that were out there too, you know, when they came back, their uniform had been thrown stuff at them, who knows what, and everybody said to burn the uniform. I don't want that uniform. Burn it. Just burn it.
Jake.
Except for Jake. Anybody got any thoughts on his willingness to keep his uniform, and I wouldn't say overlook the situation, but not look at it like everybody else did.
I think that the other people were kind of taking it. I know this sounds weird, but they were taking it personal, and he was just like, that was the situation. We were in the situation. It's messy. we made it through. Of course, this is what the people are going to do. And he just kind of like he does what he was just I do my job, I do it well. And he doesn't really get into the weeds with everything.
Do you think maybe this is kind of like a turning point for him where he starts to get into the weeds? Or is there other events that happen to him that make him more of a participant rather than a spectator?
Well, the thing with Pohan, where he's, getting whipped on the dock, and I mean that I saw as the big turning point for Steve McQueen, where he was like, the brutality, and he can, it's turned him around a little.
I think at the beginning it was he was more just whatever, at that dinner and stuff. It's like just I don't worry about any of that. But like you said, I think there was a turning point where he started to reflect and think about things and internalize where he should be, what he really wanted.
Yeah, no, there was definitely a lot of conflict there. Like you said at the beginning of the movie, he was just a participant or a spectator rather. He was good at his job. As long as he's in the engine room, he's happy. That's all he wants. But then you're right. You have, he has to shoot Pohan because nobody will do anything for him. Frenchie's death was definitely a critical point in the movie for him. And then even before that, though, what was her name? Maylee. Yeah. When she's introduced and they start talking about her background and what's going to happen to her and how they can affect that if they get this $200. And then Stosky, the big burly bully, his, actions toward that whole realm with Maylee, you could just really see a few different turning points for him. I'm not sure which one was probably more important than the other. Unless you look at it, in order of events, then you would have Pohan first. And that was pretty serious as well. But by the end of the movie, you could just, he's definitely turned. He's definitely a different character. And to be quite honest, I don't know if everybody else was surprised. I was kind of surprised by his death. I didn't think he would die.
I was.
Yep, I was shocked.
Yeah. And like I said, I hadn't seen this film before, so, I wasn't prepared for that. And then his words too, like I said, I'm not a huge Steve McQueen fan, but the way he delivered those last three little snippets, it just kind of hits you. I found myself looking back at the whole movie and looking at his character. And I don't want to say I was sad, but a little melancholy afterwards, for sure.
The Holman McQueen's character reminded me or had some resonance with me in terms of a character in another movie we have not watched. And that was Colin Farrell's character in Tigerland. And I don't know if you've seen that movie, but both of the characters really don't have a commitment to the service itself, but they develop a commitment to other people. And it's in that context they start to show leadership characters and characteristics, and they really come into who they really are. And that kind of shows up in in those final scenes with McQueen, where it's pretty clear he's willing to sacrifice himself for the other people.
Yeah, and I was kind of reminded of, I believe the movie's called 55 Days at Peking with Charlton Heston. And there's a character in there who has it is kind of the same situation. It's set in China during this time, or actually it was during the Boxer Rebellion, if I'm not mistaken. But there is one of the characters, they are cavalrymen, and one of the characters has a son that was birthed by one of the locals, but she had since passed. And so whenever they come back from a mission to this town where they're stationed at, his son will come, and they have this great relationship. But it's just it's striking that and I would kind of peg it with Frenchie too, and Miley or Melee. Just the way that they become more of a person. You're not a sailor anymore. You're a human being, and you're dealing with other human beings. And in war movies in particular, that's kind of a hard point to get across because you're always dealing with the other, which is the enemy. And so to show that human side, it's kind of nice to see, especially when it's pulled off so well. And Chris, back to your point, I think it was pulled off well by Steve McQueen and by Richard Attenborough. Lisa?
I think he was a little bit like the character from the River Kwai, where he didn't really care about the military or anything, and then he sacrificed at the end. He came to, right at the end
Yeah.
So there was a little similarity there.
Yeah, and that's kind of a plot line that you see repeated a lot, is this non-hero who becomes a hero to a certain degree. And yeah, William Holden in Bridge on the River Kwai, that fit his part perfectly. He did become a hero at the end. I kind of wanted to get into the filmmaking aspects a little bit. I usually keep talking about the plot lines and we never have time for the filmmaking aspects, but I was really impressed with the realism that they put across in this film, particularly the opening scene. I didn't know what to expect from this film when I first started watching it, but that opening scene just drew me in. It was so awesome. Over 1,000 extras. That port covered an area of over 2 square miles. They had to bring in 100 sampans, 14 junks, and then period shipping all over the harbor. So, the question here is, how did the director and the production designer achieve this realism in this interwar period, and particularly the scenes where either the San Pablo was at port or approaching port? Another good scene was when they're approaching the second city that they had to go to, and there's all the sampans out there and they're holding their signs, Americans go home. That was visually striking as well. And I just want to get everybody's sense on how you think they did in scenes like that.
It just kind of sets up for me the West versus East, that the Western Army has, the big powerful ship, and the Chinese have, the junks and the little floating barges and so on. And so right away, it doesn't seem like a fair fight, other than the Westerners are, in a foreign land and outnumbered and all of those other factors.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Chris?
I just kind of wondered how they wrangled all those extras. I almost had a feeling that they had to have a coolie system for the coolie system.
On the research that I was doing, this was done in a small town in Taiwan, which is where they did a lot of the filming at, called Tom Sui. And that's where they did most of the scenes where the San Pablo is on the water. And they basically employed pretty much the whole town. It was a fishing town, and they employed the whole town to come out and turn out for 3 or 4 days to film that opening scene. And then another thing that I thought was striking as well is, if you have 1,000 extras, this is before CGI and all that, you have to costume all these extras.
Yeah.
Anybody want to? And I'm trying to pull something in particular here. Anybody want to remark on the costuming?
Well, I don't know about that time and what people were wearing at that time specifically, historically, but I thought it felt very stereotyping.
Oh, okay.
The way that everybody was dressed.
With the big wide brim,
Yes.
straw hats and
Yes.
I don't know what they're called, the
and the little-
gowns and
And the little Chinese beanie.
Oh,
type
yeah.
things for Chen and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I thought the dress felt very stereotyping.
okay. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming that the costume designer did a lot of historical research, and I'm hoping that they were historically accurate.
Yeah.
But you know, you're right. I could definitely see, you know, how that would come across. And I was
you
actually
talked
hoping, oh, sorry, go ahead.
you talked about the scenes, like the big scenes, but like you mentioned with the town, I thought the town scene, just like them coming down through the alleyway and through the town, I thought all that felt realistic, but it sounds like it was.
Yeah, and it was kind of strange because those scenes were shot in Taipei mostly, but there was a couple scenes that were filmed in Hong Kong at the time. And I don't know, you know, if everybody's boned up on their, you know, 1920s history, but in Hong Kong during this period, I said at the beginning of our discussion that the cast and crew had to endure earthquakes, which really happened right at the beginning of filming. One night, huge earthquake in Taipei or Taiwan. The very next day from the earthquake, the hotel that some of the cast and crew were staying in caught fire, so that burned to the ground. But while they were in Hong Kong, there was rioting for 3 days that ended with 1 dead, 1 wounded, and over 1,800 arrested. And it's kind of, I don't want to say funny, but it certainly matches the theme of the film, because what everybody was rioting in Hong Kong about during this time was British colonialism. So, you know, here we are basically 40 years later from the historical fact when they're doing their shooting in 65 and 66. And there's still, you know, tensions between their colonial masters and the local population. And what that rioting was all about was that the British Commonwealth ran a ferry service from one very important place in Hong Kong to another. And this ferry system was relied upon greatly by the local population. And all of a sudden, one day, they just decided to raise the fares anywhere from 25 to 50%. And that did not go over well. So there was 3 days where the cast and crew kind of stood at their hotel balconies and looked out at riots going on, like you would see in Paris or other places that are, you know, politically active like that. So I just thought that, you know, that's kind of strange, especially when it coincides with the theme of the film.
Yeah.
And also the irony of the Chiang Kai-shek was mentioned in the storyline, and then you get to the end and it says filmed in Taiwan. Right? He's back.
You know, and then during this whole filming, you have the Vietnam War in the background. And I read a lot of articles that said, oh, well, this was, you know, meant to be a metaphor for the Vietnam War and colonialism and imperialism. The movie's pretty much based on the book, which was written in '62. And the author of the book was basing it off of he was actually a brown water sailor from China, or not from China, but in China during this period. And he's writing on his experiences. So while you can see connections to the Vietnam War, there was none that were specifically put in the book or the movie, you know, to make it, you know, a political statement. Oh yes, back to the costumes. Sorry, Lisa. One bit of the costuming that was not, what's the word you use there? Well, one bit of the costuming that was actually very authentic, yeah, stereotype, thank you, was the Navy uniforms.
It was not.
Always, sorry?
Did you say it was not?
No, it wasn't stereotypical as in the sense of when I watch movies, especially military movies, I'm looking at uniforms, and I can't tell you how many times you just see a lot of things that just shouldn't be there. It's just.
Did they not have khakis back then?
No, the Navy really didn't switch to khakis until the 60s. Oh. And my last museum was a Navy museum, and we did a huge exhibit on Navy uniforms, so I do kind of know some of this stuff. But the uniforms that they had in the movie are very authentic, except for one piece. And if you do want to go back and take a look at the movie again and watch it, I would definitely commend you to look at Navy uniforms, especially Steve McQueen. They switch so many times from whites to blues to shorts to pants. Dungarees were used, which was fantastic. The Navy doesn't use dungarees anymore. It's kind of like a jean material. And so the use of that in the movie I thought was great. But one little feature I thought was really cool was that when Steve McQueen is on his date with Candice Bergen, he has his whites on, but he has his sleeve rolled up. And on the inside of his sleeve, they used to wear what's called Liberty cuffs. And it's an unauthorized addition to the uniform, but you can get them in any Navy port back in the day. And it was just a thin strip of cloth that was highly decorated, and each different type of Liberty cuff had a meaning. And when you look at Steve McQueen's, he has an Oriental dragon, very detailed, very colorful, stitched on the inside of his sleeve. And that was to denote that you were a Oriental Navy sailor. And there's other different types to denote different things. And I was just really impressed with the use of those Liberty cuffs. I thought that was fantastic. You usually don't see attention to detail like that. One thing they did mess up on was his ratings patch on his arm. I'm not going to explain everything that was on there, but the eagle with the propeller down below basically signaled that he was a machinist mate. The only problem is the eagle's facing the wrong way. The eagle that he had was a World War II and beyond eagle, and it's facing frontwards toward his heart. Prior to World War II, that eagle would have been facing backwards, looking behind him for the enemy. And so he did have the wrong patch on his uniform there. I'll give him a little bit of slack, but only because they impressed me so much with the Liberty cuffs.
I thought on the uniform side, I thought the shorts, when I first saw the shorts, all I could think of was the British imperialists in India.
Right.
It just seemed, it almost seemed comical to see them wearing that.
I was going to liken it to a bad Monty Python sketch.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't see that depicted too often. I don't think that was a very long-lived uniform adaptation. I don't think the Army had it at all, or the Marines. I think that was strictly a Navy thing, and they didn't stick with it for too long. But yeah, it is kind of strange to see a military uniform consist of shorts.
Yeah. With this end.
Go ahead. Say something.
We are starting to get a little low on time, and of course, I'm going to ask my favorite question. Who was everybody's favorite character and why? And I will start with Sally.
I'm gonna switch. I'm not doing the stud muffin Steve McQueen this time. I'm gonna switch to Frenchie. I really liked Frenchie's character. He was my favorite in this one.
Yeah, Richard Attenborough is a great actor. It took me a few minutes to place him as the same guy who was in Jurassic Park. Yeah, and also Kris Kringle from Miracle on 34th Street.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so you know, it's you see an actor in one role, but then as the years go on, you see them in different roles doing different things. But he was a great actor.
Did you raise your hand?
And I think I don't have an agreement with question. My favorite character. Let's see, Chris.
I kind of like Mai Lee. I thought she was kind of a moral center for the whole thing. She kind of brought together a lot of the moral issues in this thing. The auction scene was particularly particularly grabbed me because it reminded me of the rape scene in Platoon.
Yes.
But to me, her character was able to bring together all those threads, and particularly in that scene.
Yeah, that was a tough scene to watch, especially when you know that that's how we acted back then. Yeah.
It was also reminiscent of a history that we had with slave auctions.
Yes, that's what I thought of.
Yeah. Lisa, how about you?
I like the ensign. I thought that he was stable and loyal, and I liked him.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a good role. And you know, it kind of, I don't want to go off of what Chris just said about, you know, Meili being that moral center. He wasn't, the ensign wasn't a moral center, but he was certainly a
Consistent.
galvanizing force on the ship.
Yes.
He was that space between leadership and the lower enlisted. And
He was
yeah, no, I enjoyed his character too.
consistent through the whole movie.
Yeah.
I would say about Meili, you know, if you look at the two female characters, her character and the Candice Bergen character, I thought the Meili character was a lot more credible. I mean, the Candice
Yes.
Bergen was just, you know, she was a pretty face and her hair didn't get messed up. And, you know, when they were kind of blockaded there and, you know, nobody talked about, well, we have to ration food because we're going to be out of this, you know, we're going to be out of touch to the ports for a period of time. You know, she just didn't have any, I didn't really believe her as a missionary person.
Just quickly on that, like you said that you're, Eric said that you're not a Steve McQueen fan. I'm not a Candice Bergen fan, and she didn't. Yeah, she didn't do anything in the movie that I thought was.
Tell him she's only 19 years old. Would you let him know that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well-
no, and yeah, she was only 19 at the time, but I didn't, I'm kind of right there with you, Lisa. Go ahead, sir.
My favorite character was Frenchie too, but I think the most maybe the most interesting character I thought was the skipper. Just, you know, I mean, I said to Kat, you know, he had when he was there with the gun in his chambers, and I thought he was going to do it. You know, I thought he was going to blow himself away or something. And it seemed like he kind of had a death wish the whole second half of the movie. Or, you know, kind of I don't know, feeling of impending doom or something that, you know, played out in the end. But his development as a character from when they were just, you know, the ship showing force to the, you know, in there as a show of force and just going from one river to another. And suddenly having to become a real skipper where he's in a war zone. His development, I thought, was very interesting.
Jump in.
I thought that Frenchie was probably the moral compass of the movie. Steve McQueen just didn't say that much, and although that's the way he acted. But on the part about the shorts in the Army, I worked at Fort Sheridan, and they had a lot of historical pictures, and there was a color guard from about the 1950s where they were wearing the British tan shorts during the summertime. So, and with knee socks. I don't think the sailors wore the knee socks, but yeah, the Army adopted the shorts from the British, I guess. But there is photographic proof that yes, the Army did wear shorts as kind of I guess it would be a B uniform. Is that Class A's would be a whole suit. This was a little bit less formal.
Right, and I want to say I liked Frenchie too, and part of my appreciation for him came from the extras that we watched to the film, because I didn't realize he had such a thick, heavy accent. He really had to master, you know, American English to play that role. So I gave him a lot of credit for that. Another point that the extras brought out was that he and McQueen were the perfect match, because Frenchie had all the emotion in his face. He just lit up. He was beaming. And yet McQueen had it more like from the eyes and more the subtlety. And they said that when the script was written, there was a lot more dialogue that McQueen was supposed to do, but he didn't want to do it because he felt his face and his expressions said more than the physical words. And he got in such an embittered battle with the screenwriter that the screenwriter eventually was fired and someone else was brought in. So I just thought that was interesting information.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
absolutely right about the falling out with the screenwriter and Steve
Right.
McQueen. And yeah, he was sent off set. He was sent packing because he couldn't get along with the star.
Mhm.
Shame. And thanks for bringing up that information about the Army wearing shorts. You said Fort Sheridan. That's Fort Sheridan down in Illinois, right?
Right, yeah.
That's where we're from. We're from
Yeah,
Chicago
we're
here,
from
listening
Chicago.
in.
Oh, okay, excellent. Yes, I was, my last job at a museum was right there in Great Lakes, 10
Okay.
miles from Fort Sheridan. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so somebody's got the picture, so just maybe go 1950s and see if you can find pictures of maybe other short. Of course, now this is Chicago, so we're not talking about being down in the South or anything like that, where you would figure shorts would make more sense. But
I was at Fort Stewart in Georgia and over in Iraq, and I tell you what, I would have loved to have shorts in both of those places rather than long pants. All right, everybody. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed the movie and definitely enjoyed the conversation tonight. As always, always got a lot of smart people here and just really good movie buffs, bringing up little points of interest that escape me most times. So thanks for all of that. And I look forward to everybody showing up next month. Next month, we are going to watch a little bit more of a modern film, and it's going to be Fury with Brad Pitt and Shia LaBeouf. You know, I got my tanker in there, so that's good. But Shia LaBeouf in particular, when you watch this film, pay attention to his role. You may not like him from some of his other roles, but the role that he plays in Fury is not like his other roles at all. I was floored by his performance in that. And as you can see, we have some other events coming up here too. Our next Drink and Draw on June 11th is going to feature a guest artist, MB Delacchio. She'll be logging in from London, where she's based at. It will be a pre-recorded event, but she will be on to take questions at the end. We also have a book talk with Joanne Carr, talking about some of the research that she's done on Wisconsin women's voices from the Civil War, and that'll be on Monday, June 14th. I need to move my cursor here. Trivia night you see on June 15th. And then, of course, like I said, Fury at the end of the month on the 25th. And then we have many other, was he Lisa just pointed this out, that the bully was from Gomer Pyle. That wasn't the sergeant, was it? Was it? Okay. I thought his face looked familiar, but yeah, I have to go back and take a look at that. I didn't put those two together. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And now I can see it. I can see it in my head. Thanks for pointing that out, Lisa. So yeah, if you want to sign up for any of our upcoming events, you can always do so at our website, wizvetsmuseum.com. Go to the events section, and all our events are listed there, and you can sign up and register for free. And I hope everybody has a great weekend, and especially on Monday, remember to take a moment, just to honor those who have served and have fallen in the line of duty. It's a somber day for us at the museum, and we have some information about what we're doing to remember veterans during Memorial Day, and you can find that on our website as well, and also on the Department of Veteran Affairs for Wisconsin website too. So I bid everybody a great weekend, and hopefully this rain will clear off and we can at least have a nice day or two. Frost warnings tonight here in Madison, if you're in the Madison area. So pull your plants in. We were talking about that earlier.